achieve their self-determination. Be it autonomy, be it independence, but be it what you want and what your brethren in Morocco want. What do the RIF want? How can they achieve it? Well, let's look at what self-determination is anyway, because you'll hear a lot of that today, the word self-determination. But what actually is it? Well, it's not a new principle or concept. It's been around a long time. The national self-determination is the right of people to determine who or how they rule themselves. The word self-determination hasn't always been used in history, but the actual activity of people searching for it has. Whether it's Italians trying to get freedom from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or whether it's Colombians trying to get freedom from Spain, all have been struggling for self-determination, even if they didn't use that particular word. But those early national self-determinists got very little support and had to rely totally upon friendly states or their own resources. This first changed after the First World War, when the US President Woodrow Wilson, in his famous 14-point speech to Congress in 1918, explained that his belief in self-determination. And this meant that each nation should have the power to self-govern and not to be ruled by other nations. He elaborated this later in a speech to the US Congress later in that year, and I'll quote from it. "National aspirations must be respected. People may now be dominated and governed only by their own consent. Self-determination is not a mere phrase. It is an imperative principle of action, which statesmen will henceforth ignore at their peril." At the time, it was largely focused on European empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian Empire, the German Empire at that time, rather than colonial empires. But self-determination came to include the whole world when the United Nations was formed in 1945. And Article 1 of that founding charter says, and I'll quote from this, "The purpose of the United Nations are to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace." This has been replicated by other United Nations resolutions. The Declaration of Principles of International Law in 1970 said, "Every state has a duty to promote, through joint and separate action, realisation of the principles of equal rights and self-determination of people." The International Covenant of Human Rights in 1966 said all people have the right to self-determination. The Declaration of Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and People in 1960 said all people have the right to self-determination. So, why is it that we don't have self-determination in most parts of the world? Well, the UN doesn't follow its own declaration. It should really be known as the United States, because it's a club of states that largely protects its distant borders. Many of them have more than one nation in their own area, and therefore a potential state within their own state. And because of this, although the UN talks about self-determination, it also talks about something called territorial integrity, keeping the borders between states in place. For example, the Declaration of Principles of International Law I mentioned before, although it talks about self-determination, it also talks about nothing in the foregoing paragraph shall be construed as authorising anything that would dismember or impair the territorial integrity or political unity of sovereign and international states. Now, of course, most self-determinists like yourselves would say that the governments do ignore self-determination. They do ignore you. They don't care what you say. They just do their own thing. But governments will still hide behind this get-out clause to say we can't give the RIF, for instance, self-determination in Morocco because we don't want to lose any territory. We don't want to lose the resources that your country, your territory has. We want to keep it. And they say to the United Nations, well, we don't need to talk about self-determination, we'll focus on territorial integrity. So that's the problem with the UN. It won't act in defence of its own principles. And to understand why states ignore self-determination and why the UN ignores it in particular, you have to look at the reason why it was founded. The United Nations and the League of Nations after the First World War was created by victorious powers in a war. And the primary aim was to dismantle empires. The Central European Empire after the First World War, and those of the colonial powers after the Second. And I mean, America was interested in destroying the imperial preferences that France and Britain had in its empires. So it's quite happy to talk about self-determination, but it wasn't particularly bothered about what replaced it. So they're happy for France and Britain to leave, and Spain, to leave the areas that they controlled, but weren't concerned about who was in control afterwards. So it didn't say to the Rif, for instance, do you want to be part of Morocco, or do you want to be independent? You were never asked. They just said, we're going, bye-bye, and the strongest power will take control. And that was Morocco. So Morocco could force the Rif to be together. The same thing was replicated in Pakistan, in India, in Indonesia, in countless countries around the world. The empires walked away, and the biggest, strongest nation took control. And there is the problem. Now, in my opinion, this word territorial integrity is about the protection of borders from the designs of neighbours, you know, about not being invaded. That's what it's about. But they use it to hold down peoples, and we need to break that. So we're not going to find the United Nations or other bodies such as the EU Commission, the Commonwealth, the African Union, the OAS or the ASEAN, which is in South Asia. They're not going to support self-determination very readily, because the states that work within those organisations don't want it. We all know about Catalonia and the Basques looking for independence in Spain, don't we? Well, the Spain says, oh, we're not going to let you have a referendum because it's not in our constitution. Well, the Catalonians and the Basques never had a say in that constitution. So, obviously the EU is being pressured not to support peoples that want independence within the EU. So, we can't look to those bodies to be your saviours. So where do we go? What do we do under those what do you do under those circumstances? Well, within many countries, the opportunity to achieve self-determination will be nigh impossible. Lack of freedom, suppression and violence will prevent any chance of an Arab Spring freeing those people, because it's difficult to organise over there, even more so from abroad. You know, if you go to the Rif, I'm told that it would be very difficult for you to talk about independence, talk about autonomy in the Rif in Morocco, because your freedoms will be taken from you, at best. And that situation is replicated throughout the world, trust me. You go to Pakistan, and if you're a Baloch or a Sindh person, you'll just be killed. You know, it's not just about, oh, you might be stopped by the police or imprisoned. They'll just kill you. It's far worse. So some countries it's worse than others, but the chance of operating in your homeland is very difficult for people. So it's obviously easier to operate here. I mean, we have a meeting here today. How long would this meeting last in the Rif, in Morocco? Would it be attacked by the police? I think the answer is probably yes, if you're aware of it. But you can have this, you have that freedom in the West to organise, and that should be lauded and supported. It's wonderful that we have that freedom, but you don't have it back home. However, the fact that you do have that freedom here gives you an opportunity to use it. You have to use the freedom that you have here. And in my opinion, the struggle for self-determination in many cases has been passed from your homeland to here, to you. The future of the Rif is in your hands more than in the Rif in your homeland. I'll explain why. You must remember that state leaders, the people who run Holland, the people who run the United Kingdom where I come from, and the people who run Germany and all the other European countries, and the West in general in America, it's obviously run by the elites. And those elites aren't particularly interested in self-determination either, because it makes their life difficult. You know, if we want to trade and work with 100 countries, why do we want to work with 1,000 countries? Which is what our principles would produce. So from their selfish perspective, they want to make it easy. In fact, some of them would like to see one world government. That would be very easy to work with, wouldn't it? Just one person to speak to, one government. That's totally against what we believe in, but those elites, they would prefer that. So, to fight a war of hearts and minds, we must first look to the people, the ordinary people of the countries that you operate in. So we're not talking about the RIF now, in your case. You're talking about the Dutch people and other communities that have moved to Holland or been born in Holland. Those are the people you need to reach out to for support. Because there may be many RIF in Holland, but there's an awful lot more Dutch people in Holland. You need to convert them. Absolutely vital, and I'll come on to how we do that. Because we believe that the majority of people, the majority of Dutch people, the majority of British people, German people, French people, would support the principle of self-determination. You know, there won't be many people out there who will say, to your face, oh no, we don't need self-determination, you should have the right, when they're exercising that right themselves. At the moment, Europe is a big issue within Europe. You know, do people want to lose their Dutch sovereignty and become part of the United States of Europe? That's obviously a big debate in Holland, as it is in the United Kingdom. Well, that is a principle of self-determination, is it not? You know, do you want to be part of the United States of Europe, or do you want to retain Dutch sovereignty? That is self-determination. Dutch people's choice. That's what we believe in. In the same way that the RIF denied that choice in Morocco. And we're saying, well, Dutch people will understand that principle. So, in my opinion, it would be reasonably easy to win over hearts and minds of Dutch people, and French, and German, and British, Norwegian, Sweden. All Western European countries will understand your principle of your cause. To do it, of course, needs a massive output of material. You know, you have RIF here now. I don't know if there's any Dutch people, apart from the RIF Dutch people, sitting here. So clearly, we need to reach out to your neighbours, your friends, your work colleagues. Everybody else other than the RIF needs to be reached out to. You have to produce lots and lots of material to do that. You know, lots of leaflets, videos, Facebook. Every means possible needs to be used to promote your cause. And I believe if your cause is promoted heavily enough, you will win support. We, of course, are doing that. There's a brilliant 30-minute video film of Balok, which is in Pakistan, abductions. It's called The Line of Freedom. If you go on the internet, you may come across it. Absolutely brilliant film, almost done on Hollywood standards. It's not entertainment, of course, it's about a true story of Balok nationalists, peaceful nationalist students who were abducted. One of them escaped, and then a year later he was abducted again and presumably killed. Absolutely brilliant, and it's fantastic propaganda. And every cause needs to do that. We need to use film and leaflets, everything, every tool that we can. We are also, obviously, producing material, Nation Without States, which is one of the groups that represent. We not only are promoting all the causes, we're also trying to promote individual causes. I think outside you'll find lots of our material. It's all free. Please take copies of everything. And you'll also see a copy of Freedom, which is about the RIF Republic. Restored RIF Republic. You'll see it on the table. I think we've only got about 20 of those, so if you don't get one now, you won't get one till later. I don't know if the RIF will produce it. It is in English, but bear in mind, many, many more people speak English around the world than with respect speak RIF. So obviously if you're going to convert the world, you've got to use the language of the world. You can use convert to Spanish, you can convert to Portuguese, to German, to whatever you wish. We'd like to see that translated everywhere, in every language ultimately. But fortunately or unfortunately, obviously English is understood by the Americans, a second language for many Dutch people,